You would never imagine that a simple customer would be humiliated in this way, even more so if that customer was Snoop Dogg. In a world where appearance still speaks louder than character, situations like this make us question, how far can prejudice lead? Imagine entering a place with the aim of making a dream come true, but being greeted with disdainful looks, doors closing, and the cruel judgment of those who believe that you don't belong there. Now, think with me. What would you do if you were kicked out of a place just for looking like not suitable? Stories of injustice make us angry, but nothing is more satisfying than a twist where justice is done, right? When arrogance meets truth, the emotional impact is so strong that it makes us believe again in the power of karma and poetic revenge. And this story, which you are about to hear, is proof that life always finds a way to get back at you. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person? Today, you will find out. Few things are as powerful as restored justice. Seeing the villain getting what he deserves and the oppressed finding redemption gives us a unique feeling of satisfaction. But what about when that lesson comes in the most unexpected way, with a twist that no one could have predicted? This is where today's story begins. Snoop Dogg, one of the most recognized and respected names in the world, decides to do something that seemed simple. Buy a car. However, what should be an ordinary day turns into a scenario of humiliation and judgment which leaves all speechless. How would you react if you were in his shoes? Would you accept disrespect or show who you really are? Get ready, because the lesson this arrogant employee learned will surprise you. But before you continue, leave it in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged solely on your appearance? Your story can inspire others. At a luxury dealership where the glitter of windows and the roar of expensive engines were part of the daily spectacle, the rule was clear. Only customers who displayed visible wealth were treated with the respect worthy of kings. There, every look carried judgment, and service seemed to be reserved exclusively for those who displayed it. The environment, full of sophistication and exclusivity, exuded superiority. The floor shined as if it had never been walked on. The cars gleamed under strategically placed lights, and the staff wore impeccable suits, ready to please, as long as you looked like the proper kind of customer. It was a place where appearances not only mattered, but set the tone of every interaction. And that day, everything seemed to work perfectly, until Snoop Dogg walked through those doors. The dealership's ambient music gradually fades away, while the sound of the automatic door echoes in the background, followed by an awkward silence. Wearing simple clothes, with nothing to suggest the status of one of music's greatest legends, Snoop Dogg walked into that imposing showroom like any other customer. He wasn't surrounded by security guards, he didn't carry an entourage, nor did he sport the sparkle of jewelry he often wears at shows and events. No, he was just an ordinary man, with the same humble demeanor that has so often made him a figure admired for his authenticity. But to the trained eyes of the salesman watching him from across the room, he was something else. A thing, a stranger who didn't belong there. The salesman, who looked more like a guardian of luxury, looked him up and down like someone evaluating defective merchandise. It was clear that in his mind, Snoop was nothing more than someone who had walked into the wrong place. And do you know what's most curious? There wasn't even a polite greeting, not a single cordial word. Instead, the icy silence was broken by a sarcasm-laden question. "Can I help you with something, sir?" The tone was clear. It wasn't an offer of help, it was a challenge. And, as if that wasn't enough, other employees began to notice Snoop's presence, exchanging knowing glances, as if they shared the same thought. What is he doing here? Sounds of low laughter in the background, as Snoop calmly looks at the cars, pretending not to notice the reactions around him. Snoop Dogg was not just a celebrity, he was a man who knew the value of humility. He looked at cars with the curious gaze of someone who knew what he wanted, but at the same time, he carried with him the patience of someone who had already faced much more than that hostile environment could offer. Even so, the atmosphere was charged. With every step he took, it seemed as if the eyes of the salespeople were following him, as if he were an intruder in an exclusive territory. And that was when the first direct provocation came. "These cars are pretty exclusive, you know. We don't sell to just anyone." The sentence came out with the smoothness of a razor, cutting off any chance of friendly service. There was no doubt the salesman had decided that Snoop was not worthy of being there. But what he didn't know was that he was making a mistake that would change his life forever. Ignoring the rudeness, Snoop continued to observe the cars, walking calmly, but it was impossible not to notice the increasingly hostile environment around him. One of the most expensive models in the store caught his eye. It was a state-of-the-art sports car with gold details and a price that could buy a luxurious house. As he approached to inspect the vehicle, Snoop was interrupted again, this time even more directly. "I'm sure we have more affordable models in the catalog. Maybe something more suitable for you?" Paying attention to the interaction. It was like watching a show where everyone knew who the protagonist was, except the villain of the story. Even in the face of humiliation, Snoop maintained his characteristic calm. He didn't need to raise his voice, nor show any irritation. He knew that the real turnaround was yet to come. Because, as the salesman continued to demonstrate his contempt in an increasingly evident way, Snoop was just waiting for the right moment. After all, a great lesson requires patience. But the question remains, what will Snoop do now? How will he turn this situation into one of the greatest poetic revenges ever seen? Just listening to this story so far, you can feel the weight of injustice, right? How many times have you seen or experienced something similar? Moments when prejudice, judgment by appearance, or someone's arrogance made you or someone else go through humiliating situations. The difference here is that in this story, justice will be served in a way that no one expected. So before we continue, I want to know, what would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? How would you react in the face of so much contempt? Leave your comment below. I read each one, and I really want to know your opinion on this situation. It's revolting to think that we live in a world where respect seems to depend on how much respect you appear to have or who people think you are, isn't it? But stories like this make us reflect, learn, and remember that no one is above the power of karma and poetic justice. So, share your experience. Have you ever been underestimated? Or maybe you yourself have seen something like this happen to someone close to you? Leave your report in the comments. Let's talk about it, because this is a space for us to learn together. In fact, if you're enjoying this story so far and want to see more content like this, don't forget to like. Just click the button. This really helps the channel grow and continue bringing stories of justice, unexpected twists, and poetic revenge. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Activate the bell to receive all notifications and stay up to date with the next stories that will move, shock, and inspire you. Here, each video is made for move you and make you see the world in a different way. Now back to our point. What happens next is something you won't want to miss. The seller doesn't even realize what a colossal mistake he's making, and how Snoop handles it will surprise you. Do you think he'll confront the seller, ignore it, and walk away silent? Or maybe he has something even bigger in mind? Stay with me, because the twist is coming, and the lesson that will be taught here is something we can all learn from. I guarantee you the next part of this story will make you feel that relief of seeing justice finally being served. So get ready to witness a moment that will leave you speechless. See you next. He entered the door with calm steps, without rushing, without any intention of attracting attention. At that moment, Snoop Dogg didn't want to be a star. I didn't want spotlights, flashes, or even being recognized. He was just a man who wanted to do something simple. Buy a car he had been planning to buy for a long time. The appearance? Nothing flashy. A faded sweater, plain jeans, and a cap that partially covered his face. To the dealership employees, he was a complete nobody. But what they didn't know, and were about to discover, is that this nobody was, in fact, one of the richest and most influential personalities on the planet. The curious thing is that for Snoop, it didn't matter. He had faced judgment from others throughout his life. From the first steps in his career, he always had to prove his worth, break prejudices, and earn respect. At that moment, he just wanted a moment of peace, away from the glamour and expectations that came with his name. However, what he found there was something very different from tranquility, an environment full of arrogance, prejudice, and a cold judgment that was evident in the eyes around him. The feeling of being underestimated was nothing new to him, but that didn't make the situation any less irritating. Snoop didn't need to prove anything to anyone, which is exactly why he maintained his unwavering stance, ignoring the disdainful looks and disguised smiles from employees. He walked between the cars, studying each model carefully, like someone who knows exactly what he's looking for. But to the sellers, he was not a customer, not in that environment. To them, he was just someone out of place. As he passed through one of the main corridors, one of the salespeople decided to take action. Perhaps he felt he was protecting the store's prestige, or perhaps he simply couldn't hide the prejudice that gripped him. With an expression that mixed contempt and superiority, he approached Snoop and uttered a sentence that would only be the beginning of the humiliation. "These cars here are extremely exclusive. Maybe I can recommend a dealership with more affordable prices." The phrase was said in a falsely polite tone, but the intention was clear. That place was not for him. Snoop remained silent. There was no need to react, at least not yet. He knew that the situation would still escalate and seemed to be waiting for the right moment to act. But the provocation didn't stop there. As Snoop looked at one of the store's most luxurious models, the same salesperson, now accompanied by another employee, began making loud comments as if to make sure he heard, "I think he's in the wrong place. These cars aren't for everyone." And again, the entire showroom seemed to be paying attention. Every customer, every employee, everyone watched the scene as if they were watching a show of humiliation. The most impressive thing is that even with all the contempt directed at him, Snoop maintained his characteristic calm. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't seem angry or shaken. Because, for someone who has faced so many battles in life, this was just another one. And the truth is that he knew something that no one there knew. He was in control of the situation. Snoop's patience was not a sign of weakness, but rather of strength. He was just waiting for the right time to turn the tide. But let's be honest, can you imagine what Snoop was thinking at that moment? Have you ever thought about what it must be like to be in a place where you are not respected simply because you are not dressed the right way? How would you feel if you were treated like a nobody just because of the way you look? This is the reality for many people, and seeing this happening to someone like Snoop Dogg only reinforces how much society still judges based on appearances. Now the tension is about to reach the limit. Snoop knows he doesn't need to prove anything, but at the same time, he knows there are lessons that can only be taught through actions. And the seller? He's about to realize he underestimated the wrong person, but until then, he continues to believe he's in control. Do you think Snoop will shut up or come back in a way no one expects? Leave your guess in the comments. And tell me, have you ever been through something similar? Write the word respect in the comments, because that's what the world needs. More respect and less hasty judgments. Ricardo, the salesman who approached Snoop Dogg, was exactly the type of employee that the luxury dealership valued. Well-dressed, with an impeccable suit, carefully groomed hair, and a posture that exuded an air of superiority. He was not just a salesman, but the self-proclaimed unique customer expert. For him, serving was more than selling. It was an opportunity to reinforce the idea that only the right people, those who appeared rich and powerful, deserved to be there. And for Ricardo, Snoop Dogg was clearly not one of those people. From the moment Ricardo spotted him, with his casual attire and calm aura, he had already decided that Snoop was not worthy of attention. While Snoop calmly walked through the showroom, looking at the cars like any other interested customer, Ricardo took longer than necessary to approach. He was in no hurry. After all, in his mind, that man wasn't there to buy anything. Perhaps he wouldn't even be able to pay for the coffee served at the reception, let alone one of the luxury vehicles on display. And when he finally decided to approach, Ricardo didn't make a point of being polite. "Can I help you?" he asked with a dry tone, without even looking directly at Snoop. His voice carried disdain, as if he was just fulfilling an obligation. There was no smile. There was no genuine interest. Ricardo didn't see a potential client, saw a waste of time. And the moment Snoop looked up at him and smiled slightly, Ricardo took it as confirmation of his assumption. For him, that humble man was nothing more than someone who got into the wrong place. Ricardo didn't stop there. When Snoop showed interest in one of the most expensive models in the showroom, a sports car that shined under the strategically placed lights, the salesman was direct. "This car is quite exclusive, sir. I think we have some more affordable options in our catalogue, if you want to take a look." The words came out filled with sarcasm, masked by false formality. He knew exactly what he was doing. In Ricardo's mind, he was just saving time, saving himself the effort of presenting a vehicle that, in his limited vision, Snoop would never be able to afford. Ricardo, however, seemed to have been encouraged by Snoop's silence. Instead of stopping, he continued, "Actually, sir, you might be looking for something in a different price range. There's a more popular dealership a few blocks away. They might have something that suits your style better." The irony in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't just dissing Snoop, he was mocking him. For Ricardo, that client was an intruder, someone who somehow had managed to enter an environment where he did not belong. Ricardo's attitude was not only insensitive, it was completely prejudiced. He was not based on facts, but on superficial perception. For him, Snoop's appearance, without flashy jewelry, without an expensive suit or companions to confirm his importance, was enough to determine that this man was not worthy of his respect. It was as if Ricardo had established an unwritten rule. If you don't look rich, you're not welcome. And as he spoke, his posture only reinforced his contempt. Arms crossed, looked superior, a smirk that seemed to suggest he was having fun with the situation. He believed he was in control, that he owned the environment. Ricardo acted as if the showroom was his stage, and everyone else, customers, employees, and especially Snoop, were just extras in his arrogant performance. But what Ricardo didn't know, and this made the situation even more ironic, was that he was making a colossal mistake. He was underestimating not just Snoop Dogg, but everything that man stood for. Because while Ricardo continued his attempt to humiliate Snoop, believing he was in a position of power, the truth is that the real power was in the client he so despised. The humiliation Snoop was facing at that moment was not just a reflection of Ricardo's arrogance, but of a system that values appearances more than character. But Snoop, with his life experience and characteristic patience, knew that great lessons take time. He could have defended himself, he could have revealed his identity right then and there, but he chose to wait. Because sometimes silence is more powerful than any answer. Now tell me, how would you react if you were in Snoop's shoes? What would you do in the face of such arrogance and disrespect? Write the words in the comments. Never underestimate to show that you too believe in the power of twists and poetic justice. And don't miss the next moment in this story, because things are about to get out of control. Ricardo still has no idea what a monumental mistake he's making, and how Snoop handles it will change everything. Get ready for the twist we've all been waiting for. The tension at the dealership increased by the second. Ricardo, the salesman, no longer hid his disdain. It was as if he wanted everyone there to see what he was doing, humiliating a client who, in his prejudiced mind, was in no way fit to be in that environment. He moved around the showroom with an almost theatrical stance, gesturing exaggeratedly and using a loud tone of voice, as if to ensure that even the most distant customers could hear. To him, Snoop Dogg was nothing more than someone lost, a displaced figure who needed to be reminded over and over that this place was not for him. Snoop, on the other hand, kept his cool. He asked simple questions, as any customer would, But this seemed to irritate Ricardo even more. Does this model come with a genuine leather interior? Asked Snoop, while analyzing one of the most impressive cars in the dealership. Ricardo snorted, visibly impatient. "Of course you're coming, sir," he replied with a sarcastic tone. "But honestly, do you have any idea how much this costs? This isn't the kind of car you buy on impulse." With each question Snoop asked, Ricardo seemed even angrier, as if the simple act of answering was an unbearable burden. "What about the warranty?" Snoop asked, looking calmly at the car's dashboard. Ricardo crossed his arms, leaning forward with a mocking smile. "The warranty covers 5 years, but that doesn't matter if you can't even pay the down payment, does it?" The words came out like knives, sharp, and the intention to humiliate was clear. He wasn't just responding, he was lashing out, making a point of reminding Snoop at every opportunity that he didn't belong there. And the most revolting thing was the silent support of some people around. Other employees observed the scene from afar, without interfering. Some customers exchanged complicit glances and whispered among themselves, as if they agreed with Ricardo. Arrogance seemed to infect the environment, creating an oppressive atmosphere that transformed that luxurious showroom into an arena of judgment. Snoop continued to explore the place, ignoring Ricardo's behavior, but with every step he took, hostility seemed to follow him. When he stopped in front of a sports car worth millions, Ricardo could no longer hold back his mockery. "This one," said the salesman, laughing softly. "Look, I'll just save you the trouble. This car has a starting price of 5 million. Can you afford it?" He said this with a smile that brimmed with arrogance, looking Snoop up and down as if he wanted to gauge his worth by appearance alone. Ricardo's behavior was now a mixture of impatience and cruelty. He began openly joking, commenting to another employee, "I think he just wants to hang out, you know. Maybe take a photo to show his friends. Maybe even post it on Instagram." With each comment, Ricardo's laughter seemed louder, and the eyes of other employees continued to be fixed on Snoop, waiting for some kind of reaction. But Snoop, with his characteristic patience, didn't get carried away. He continued to watch the cars as if nothing was happening, but inside, the outrage was palpable, not just for Snoop, but for anyone who has ever experienced prejudice, gratuitous humiliation, or judgment based on their appearance. Ricardo personified everything that is wrong in a world where people are measured by what they appear to have and not by what they really are. And then, as if he wanted to end the show, Ricardo decided to deliver the final blow. He approached Snoop again, now crossing his arms and tilting his head slightly to the side, like someone who believes he has complete control of the situation. "Look, I'm just going to be honest with you," he said in a condescending tone. "These cars here are for serious customers, you know. I don't want to waste your time or mine. Maybe you'd better take a look elsewhere. Maybe a more affordable car." Ricardo was convinced that he had had the last word, that he had reaffirmed his position of superiority. But what he didn't know, and what no one there seemed to imagine, was that all that was about to change. Because Snoop Dogg, that man he so despised, wasn't just another customer. He was someone who could teach a lesson that Ricardo would never forget. The turnaround was approaching, and Ricardo's fate was about to take a turn he could never have predicted. And you, what would you do if you were in Snoop's shoes? Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged unfairly? Leave the sentence in the comments. Appearances can be deceiving if you believe that respect should come before any judgment. And stay with me, because the next part of this story will show how karma comes to those who act arrogantly. Don't miss it. Snoop Dogg, even in the face of all the sarcastic comments and looks of contempt, maintained his firm stance. He had already faced much more difficult situations in his life and knew that the right time to act would always come. But it wasn't just about him. There was something bigger at stake here. Ricardo's behavior, with all its arrogance and prejudice, reflected a mentality that could not go unpunished. There was an uneasy silence in the air, and although Snoop appeared calm, everyone could sense that something was about to happen. Ricardo, on the other hand, seemed increasingly comfortable in his role as antagonist. He didn't realize he was treading dangerous territory. In his mind, Snoop was just a simple man who had no place in that luxurious showroom. With each of Snoop's movements, Ricardo approached with a more provocative, more offensive comment, as if he wanted to reaffirm his position of authority over the environment. When Snoop, in his calm, collected voice, asked, "Can I speak to the manager?" Ricardo almost lost it. For a moment he was silent, as if trying to process the request. Then he let out an ironic laugh, which echoed throughout the showroom. "Speak to the manager? What for?" he asked dismissively. "The manager is busy serving serious customers, you see. He doesn't have time for these fantasies." Ricardo's tone was unbearably condescending, and the silence that followed was even more oppressive. All eyes were now fixed on that interaction. Some of the other vendors backed away, clearly uncomfortable, while others just crossed their arms, watching like spectators of a spectacle that seemed to have no limits. Snoop kept his expression unchanged, but his next sentence was as simple as it was powerful. "I insist. Call the manager." Ricardo's face changed. He leaned forward slightly, his sarcastic smile giving way to an expression of barely concealed irritation. "Look here," he began, almost spitting out the words. "I already told you there's no point. You won't be able to buy anything here." His voice rose a notch, breaking the previously tense atmosphere with a burst of impatience. That sentence wasn't just an attack, it was a statement that in Ricardo's mind, Snoop wasn't worth the effort. The pause that followed was like the silence before a storm. Ricardo seemed pleased with himself, as if he had won that exchange of words. But at the same time, it was impossible to ignore the growing discomfort of others present. There was something in the air, a silent expectation that things wouldn't stay like this for much longer. And then Snoop stepped forward. His voice was still calm, but now there was an undeniable firmness to it. "Call the manager," he repeated, looking directly into Ricardo's eyes. "Or I could call him myself. I'm sure he'd like to know how his customers are being treated." Ricardo hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by Snoop's response. He had not expected that this man, whom he had treated with such disdain, could speak with such certainty and authority. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "Ah, so you know the manager? That's news," he said sarcastically, trying to regain his composure. "But it's okay. If it'll make you leave faster, I'll call." Meanwhile, Snoop remained where he was, his gaze focused but calm. He knew that the situation was about to change in a way that no one there expected. The other customers in the showroom whispered among themselves, some clearly curious, others visibly uncomfortable with Ricardo's behavior. But even so, no one dared to intervene. A few minutes later, the manager appeared. Unlike Ricardo, he had a professional but confused expression. Clearly, he didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Ricardo approached him before anything else and began to speak in a low voice, gesturing exaggeratedly as he explained his version of events. The manager, in turn, looked from Ricardo to Snoop with an expression that alternated between doubt and curiosity. The exchange of glances between Snoop and the manager only lasted a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The manager opened his mouth to speak, but Snoop was faster. "Are you the manager?" he asked, his voice sounding firm but respectful. When the man confirmed, Snoop continued, "I came in here to buy a car, but apparently your team believes my money isn't good enough for that." The showroom was completely silent. Snoop's sentence was like a spark, and it was clear that the manager was beginning to understand that something very wrong had happened. He looked at Ricardo, whose expression was now far from confident. There was something different in the air, and what happened next, well, it's something no one in that showroom would ever forget. And you, what would you do if you were in Snoop's shoes? Have you ever faced a situation where you had to fight to be respected? Write the sentence in the comments. Respect comes first if you believe that no one deserves to be treated like this. And stay with me, because what's coming will leave you speechless. The turnaround starts now. The silence in the showroom was deafening. Everyone waited to see how the manager would handle the situation that was clearly getting out of control. Snoop Dogg, who until that moment had demonstrated patience and unshakable calm, seemed to be about to turn the tide. The manager, still not completely understanding what was happening, looked at Ricardo with an expression of slight confusion, as if trying to put the pieces of a puzzle together. "So," Snoop began, his voice calm but firm, "it appears that my presence here has been uncomfortable for some." He looked straight at Ricardo, whose face was starting to lose color. "All I wanted was to buy a car, that's all. But from what I've been told, I don't look fit to be here." The tension in the air was palpable. Ricardo, who just minutes ago boasted arrogant confidence, now seemed to shrink with Snoop's every word. He tried to form a reaction, to open his mouth to say something, but nervousness had taken over. He knew something big was about to happen, and for the first time in that interaction, he wasn't in control. Snoop then calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Without raising his voice, without any dramatic gesture, he dialed a number and put the device to his ear. "I really didn't want this to be necessary," he said, looking directly at Ricardo as he spoke on the phone, "but I think it's time we settle this once and for all." "Hello? Yes, it's me. I'm at the dealership right now. Could you come here for a moment? It's urgent." Snoop didn't say anything else, just listened to the response on the other end of the line and ended the call. He then turned his attention to the manager, who was now visibly uncomfortable. "I believe we will have a visit soon. In the meantime, perhaps we can discuss how your clients are being treated here." The minutes that followed were like an eternity. No one in the showroom knew exactly what was going on, but everyone felt that it was much bigger than it seemed. Ricardo tried to regain control of the situation, adjusting his tie and walking towards the manager. "I think this is a misunderstanding," he said with a nervous laugh. "We don't need to involve anyone from the outside. I was just trying to filter out the customers who are most compatible with the store's profile." But before he could say anything else, the showroom's automatic door opened. All eyes turned to the entrance. A well-dressed man with a serious expression entered the place. He was the owner of the dealership. His posture commanded respect, and his presence immediately changed the energy of the room. Ricardo, who was already tense, now seemed frozen in place. Snoop said the dealership owner with a warm smile as he walked towards the rapper. He reached out his hand and shook it firmly. "It's a pleasure to see you again. If I had known you would be here, I would have come sooner." The reaction was instantaneous. Ricardo, who looked ready to disappear into the ground, looked from Snoop to the dealership owner with wide eyes. He started to mumble something, but no coherent words came out of his mouth. The truth was there, in front of everyone, and there was no escaping it. Snoop, with his characteristic calm, smiled slightly before responding. "Well, I thought it would be easier to come and pick out my next car in person, but it seems I had a little trouble getting served." His voice was calm, but carried a tone that made Ricardo shudder. The dealership owner looked at Ricardo, clearly not understanding how something like this had happened. "Difficulty? What do you mean by difficult?" Snoop gestured towards Ricardo without even looking at him. "You might want to ask your salesperson here. He seems to have very strong opinions about who should and shouldn't be in this showroom." The dealership owner, realizing the gravity of the situation, turned to Ricardo with a hard expression. "Is that so? You treated this man, this customer, with disrespect." His voice was calm, but there was a firmness to it that made the entire showroom go silent again. Ricardo tried to explain himself, but his words were confusing, full of stutters and lame excuses. I didn't know who he was. I thought he didn't seem like a serious buyer." This sentence was enough to end any chance of Ricardo redeeming himself. The dealership owner sighed deeply before turning to Snoop. "I don't know what to say. Please accept my apology for my employee's unacceptable behavior." Snoop nodded, but there was something else in his gaze, something no one had yet noticed. "I accept your apology," he said calmly, "but I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." "I'll take the car," he said, pointing to the sports model that had caught his eye earlier. "And if it's possible, we can talk about something bigger, like buying this place." The reaction was immediate. Ricardo took a step back, as if he had been hit physically. The other employees exchanged looks of astonishment, and the dealership owner blinked in confusion before realizing that Snoop was serious. "And you, Have you ever imagined being in a situation like this, where karma attacks at the right time? Comment the sentence, "Karma does not fail," if you believe that poetic justice always finds its way. But wait, because that's not all. What Snoop does next is something no one in that showroom will ever forget. Stick around for the next part. The entire showroom seemed frozen in time. Snoop Dogg's statement that he wanted to not only buy the car, but also talk about the possibility of acquiring the dealership echoed in everyone's ears like a bomb that had just exploded. Ricardo was completely stunned. His face, once marked by arrogance and contempt, now displayed a mixture of fear and regret. He was pale, wide-eyed, unable to find words or even hold anyone's gaze. He knew that his bigoted attitude had just destroyed everything: his image, his confidence, and possibly his career. The dealership owner, on the other hand, quickly regained his composure. He knew he was facing a unique opportunity and also a critical moment. "Mr. Dogg," he began, his tone formal but visibly nervous, "it would be an honor to have you as the owner of this establishment. Please allow me to correct what happened here today. This does not reflect our company values." Snoop did not immediately respond. He looked around at every face in the showroom, as if absorbing the impact of that moment. Then, with the same calmness he had shown throughout the interaction, he turned to Ricardo. "You think you know who I am now, don't you?" he asked, his voice soft but with an unmistakable weight. Ricardo tried to stammer something, but nothing coherent came out of his mouth. He was completely unarmed. Snoop continued, still looking directly at him. "But the question isn't who I am. The question is how you treat the people you care about. No, do you know? You treated me badly because you thought I wasn't important, because you thought I didn't deserve to be here. That's something I'll never forget, and something you shouldn't either." The silence in the showroom was broken by a murmur from customers and employees. Snoop's words cut deep, not just in Ricardo, but in everyone there. It was impossible not to reflect on the lesson he had just taught. Ricardo's arrogance and prejudice had transformed a simple moment of sales into a lesson in humanity, respect, and justice. With a simple gesture, Snoop put his signature on the papers to purchase the sports car. He didn't ask for a discount, he didn't bargain, he just paid full price. A gesture that, at that moment, seemed almost symbolic. "I could have walked away," he said, now speaking to the dealership owner, "but that wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to let someone like him continue to treat other people like that." The dealership owner, visibly uncomfortable, turned to Ricardo and said, "Please pick up your things. Your behavior today was unacceptable, and we cannot allow something like this to happen again." Ricardo was paralyzed, but did not protest. He knew he had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As he gathered his things, all eyes were on him, not with empathy, but with the judgment he so often imposed on others. Snoop, however, still had something to say. Before leaving, he turned to the customers and employees present. His voice was firm, but full of compassion. "Always treat everyone with respect," he said, "not because you know who they are, but because it's the right thing to do. You never know who's in front of you. It could be someone like me, but it could also be someone who's just trying to better their life, someone who deserves to be treated with dignity." There was something inspiring about the way Snoop spoke. It wasn't just about what he said, but how he said it, calmly, with patience, and with a moral authority that no one there could dispute. The lesson was clear. Respect should not depend on appearances, status, or any other superficial judgment. It was a message that resonated deeply with everyone in the showroom, leaving an impact that would be hard to forget. As Snoop headed for the door, carrying the keys to his new sports car with him, the murmurs began again. But this time, they weren't mocking or judgmental. They were comments of admiration, of reflection. Many customers and employees began to look at themselves differently, as if they had learned something valuable that day. And you? Have you ever stopped to think about how you treat the people around you? Have you ever been in a situation where you were judged unfairly or saw someone being treated cruelly just because they looked different? Snoop's story reminds us that prejudice leads nowhere, but respect and humanity can transform lives. And that was the story of how Snoop Dogg, with his calm and wisdom, not only taught a memorable lesson to someone who judged him on his appearance, but also showed us all the true value of respect. If you've made it this far, it means this message has touched you in some way, and now it's your turn to be part of this conversation. The world needs more stories like this, and together we can spread this message of empathy, justice, and comebacks that make us believe in the power of karma. If you agree that respect is worth more than any luxury, make it clear in the comments. Write, "Respect is worth more than luxury," to show that you are here, that you understand the importance of this story, and that you support this much-needed lesson. I want to see your engagement, and yes, I read all the comments, so be sure to share your opinion. Now, before you leave, take this moment to support the channel. Have you clicked the like button yet? It makes all the difference. Each like helps bring stories like this to even more people, as well as showing that you like this content and want to see more. And of course, if you are not yet registered, click on the subscribe button right now, sign up. Don't miss the chance to follow other incredible stories, full of twists, exciting lessons and endings that leave us speechless. Activate the bell too, because this way you will receive a notification every time I post a new video, and you won't want to miss the next one. And speaking of future videos, another story as impactful as this is already appearing on the screen. Click now to continue diving into this universe of justice, karma, and surprises that transform our way of seeing the world. Don't wait, this next video will surprise you even more. See you there.